All right. Welcome, everyone, to the Application Packaging Experts Roundtable. Thanks for joining us today. Glad to have you here. Kick things off by mentioning once again, if you weren't on last time, I was trying to share our excitement around App Manage event, which is still currently planned for November 12th, where we'll be sponsors, and I'll have a couple of sessions, usually do one on kind of what's new and what's coming with Admin Studio, and another that's more broadly applicable to packagers in general. So really looking forward to that. It's going to be great to have an in-person event again, assuming it happens. So really looking forward to that. Hope to see you there. Some quick housekeeping. Everyone is muted, but we have the Q&A capability of the platform here to send us questions. We'll answer any we can. There's a dedicated Q&A session at the end. At any point along the way, if you have a question, just shoot it in there, and we may interject and answer it before the Q&A session if it makes sense to do so. We've got people watching for that. And in the end, this is being recorded, and we will send the link out to everybody. So you'll have that to share with any of your colleagues that couldn't make it. My name is Bob Kelly. I run product management at Flexera and have been doing this stuff for a while. I've got Kieran, who also works with me in product management, supporting Admin Studio and other products. Michael Connor is our sales engineer that's been working with Admin Studio and supporting customers in packaging forever. And we've got Jace with us, who's a major account manager, can address any sales questions that comes up, but is mostly going to be behind the scenes helping us with the Q&A. So really appreciate his participation as well, even though you don't see him or hear from him rather. And Tim, we've got a guest at the roundtable today. I love being able to do this. I'm really happy to have Tim here with us, particularly talking about MSIX. Welcome, Tim.
Oh, thanks, Bob. It's great to be here.
What have you been up to? How would you best describe yourself? I squeezed a couple of adjectives in here.
Yeah, I'm sort of the go-to type for a lot of companies in terms of AppV and now MSIX. My big effort right now is one that you're familiar with that we're not really talking about yet, or are we? I'm not sure.
Yeah, you got to tease stuff. So another book on the way.
Yeah. So we're working on a new book for this year, one aimed for developers that are looking to turn their programs in MSIX, sort of help them out. And got some great people from your team that are helping with that book, including Kieran, who's here on the call. And we're really looking forward to getting that out there and getting more support for MSIX out in the community.
Yeah, that'll be great. And the target for that is by end of year. Obviously, more information to follow, but a reference for exactly what is going on in that manifest file and when you'd use what and what it all means. That type of material is super valuable. So excited that we have team members working with you on that. I wanted to kick things off with a poll because this is the MSIX section. It's always been a very popular question or topic rather. MSIX. When we just put it out there, what do you want to talk about? That's always the leader. So we decided to make this session mostly about that, and particularly with Tim, makes a lot of sense. But just to set the stage, what's your experience with MSIX? Are you deploying all your packages as MSIX in production? I don't expect a lot of those, but there's always those groups that are on the cutting edge. Are you deploying some applications in production? Maybe ones that would benefit from those capabilities specifically, or just some in pilot and test, or only at the command line, playing around with it, just getting your hands around, a little familiar with the technology, but not really deploying anything. Or this last category, everybody at least falls into this bucket, and that is that you just have an interest and you do 10 sessions like this, read up, just trying to stay current. So hopefully that's long enough to get some answers. And this is pretty much what I would expect. What do you think, Tim? Is this pretty much what you hear from your students?
Yep.
Yep. Okay. And one more question. What are your plans for MSIX? So are you looking to shift to MSIX as soon as it's ready, and that's going to be the format that you do everything in? I think of the old days when people would repackage everything as MSI just for consistency and knowing what was where. I think a lot of people have gotten away from that, but maybe with MSIX and the virtualization benefits, that could be rethought. Or will you leverage it just in cases when it makes sense for that technology? If you're using app attach or you have an application conflict and you want to handle certain applications differently, or only when the vendor gives it to you. So, and this is what we've been hoping would happen for a while, where we see a couple of major vendors releasing new versions of their products as native MSIX packages. I think that'll really be the tipping point for some more widespread adoption, but haven't got there yet. So what are the plans? All right, that's cool. At least a handful of people looking to go all in. That's good to see. Is this a topic of conversation with your classes, Tim, when you talk to people about their general interest in MSIX?
Yeah, I think, quite frankly, they're very confused and aren't sure what they really want to do, is what I hear most of anything. And they're looking for input, trying to get an idea of when and when it's going to be real for them.
All right, and hopefully we can help people with those types of things today. So
we don't see any. I was just wondering, we don't see any vendors coming up with MSIX yet, right? So it kind of makes sense that option was least preferred.
Yeah, but I mean, that's looking ahead, right? Presumably we should see them, and then maybe those are the only ones that you deal with. But I guess in that case, maybe
there's a couple of test people out there, right? There's a couple of test people out there that have some stuff, but they're still working on it.
Yeah, coming along. So I did want to start with some fundamentals, and this is in no way intends to be comprehensive. It's more talking points. The fundamentals. What exactly is MSIX? What does it get you? It is a virtual container. I think probably everybody on this call understands app V at least a high level. A lot of the same benefits are there in terms of isolation, so there's no conflicts. Another benefit of this being it's not really installed, so when you do remove it, it's completely gone. But that virtual container technology brings with it problems, and there's a whole fix-up platform or framework rather, to address the problems that applications might have running in a virtual container. We'll talk more about that. And then installation experience, I think, is another really big one. There's no reboots needed. You don't have to close an application because it's in use. The files are kind of installed side by side if it's an update and then switched. So it's a lot smoother installation experience. And there's no, and this could be a benefit or a drawback depending on how you look at it, but there's no install time configurations where you'd run a Windows installer setup and answer a bunch of questions about configuration. That all has to move to like a first run scenario versus being something captured during the installation. The installation is actually handled by the operating system. So it's a very consistent, simple interface, and anything crazy or fancy you want to do has to happen when the applications run. And it can be updated from the vendor source. So there's some real potential for updates here to be easier for some applications. We're all trying to get, probably half the packaging the people on the call here today are doing are to update existing applications to address security issues and so forth. So this new way to update applications could be pretty interesting, either by your controlling the source or using the vendor source and controlling when that happens is also, fundamentally, I think, something that could make this appealing technology to a lot of people once we get there. We're not there for the most part. Obviously, you can use MSIX today. You can create your own MSIX packages. You can repackage them with many tools. And once you have them, you do have some of these benefits. But I don't know that I'm seeing a lot of people really digging in. How about you, Tim? Anything I'm missing here, or any comments on any of these big blocks?
I mean, I think the one thing from some of the IT pro perspective, and actually for the developers as well, I think what you talked about in terms of the configuration, not having something there in the install. One of the biggest benefits for the enterprise is the fact that this stuff really does go in cleanly, and no application can break any other applications. Doesn't matter when things get added and removed. The thing is going to work, and that's the greatest thing with this. In terms of the configuration for the IT pro, in addition to maybe there being something that the vendor puts in on a first run, they also have the ability to use that modification package, which is the way they do configuration, which is a little bit more like making an MST file for your deployment, would be the closest model you could put it to. So it's simple. It's something people, I think, are going to readily understand and be able to make use of when they want to control that and get it pre-configured as part of their deployment.
That's a good one I should have put down here, that whole modification package scenario, because I think a lot of people do think of it as an MST because they understand the transform, but it's while it delivers a similar benefit, it is actually very different, right? Because it doesn't happen at install time. So you're not changing the behavior of the install, you're just changing files, at any point. And
it's like installing and then running a script to add
something. It's not tied to
to
that one version, right? So you don't have to recreate a modification package next time a version comes around.
Right.
That is the best thing I like about modification package. Unlike in today's scenario where I have to create a transform file for each new version of MSI whenever the vendor releases a new version, I don't have to do that for modification. I create it once and I'm set for all the future versions until I decide to add some additional configurations or something like that. So that's really cool about modification package.
Or until the installation or the product changes and now your modification package is no longer applicable. I wonder how we'll encounter those situations if it's going to be a trial and error thing, or if we'll get warnings from the vendor. That could be interesting because you think, okay, I've got these settings, I'm good, but not necessarily.
I find that I don't use a lot of MSTs. I'm usually doing a PowerShell script wrapper around installs, and I'm finding that as the vendors update their products, usually those things are pretty good. It's rare that I need to change something unless it's a major upgrade of their product, adding a whole new feature, and then I have to configure it.
Right. Yeah, it's probably how it should be. It should be a trial and error thing, and if everyone's doing some cursory testing anyway, it should be easily caught.
Yeah.
All right. We got to talk about Windows 11. So everybody's seeing, Windows 11's here. I was a little hopeful that we'd see Windows, like MSIX as a requirement for Windows 11, but they've almost gone the opposite direction, because now in the Microsoft Store, the Windows Store, you can have any installer as long as it supports a silent installation. So it need not even be an MSI, let alone a AppX or MSIX. So I think that, is good for the store, but not the best thing for MSIX. And I'm interested to hear what you think, Tim, but the one benefit that I'm hearing is that if it is an MSIX installed application, then it runs in its own memory. So it's not just a file isolation, but it gets its own chunk of memory to run in, whereas other applications run in a shared area of memory. And that could be interesting for developers, but as an IT pro, I have a hard time understanding the benefit.
Well, that's a security play, right?
Yeah.
It's almost, you think back to some of the things that they were doing in terms of the isolation for security purposes with the LSAS service, where all your credentials go. so that if there was any malware, there's no way they could access the memory. Even if they got root access, they wouldn't be able to access that memory to get at it. So I think it's more along that standpoint, and part of what we're just going to need for the future. We got to make these systems more secure. The bad guys get more creative all the time, and we got to keep up in the game.
Do you think it's enough for MSIX to be seen as a... Huh? No, not security-wise. Security, yeah, we're always going to be fighting that battle. But is the benefit of MSIX packages running in their own memory enough to move the needle for anybody deciding, should I go MSIX?
Oh, I don't think so, no.
Yeah. I was hoping there'd be more. Maybe there's more to come. I mean, there's certainly other benefits, but at least tied specifically to Windows 11, I'm not seeing Windows 11 as a true catalyst for MSIX.
I think
this
MSIX,
is not specific. Go ahead, Mike.
I was going to say, I thought MSIX would give a better end user experience because it was described when it first came out, and what I kind of likened it to is on your mobile device. You probably have an Android or an iOS device and an application, you get it from the store. You want to remove the app, you just remove it and it's gone. You don't have to worry about it leaving stuff behind and slowing the system down over time and you having to re-image your phone. You don't really do that, but you do with Windows because it leaves stuff behind. So with MSIX being a container format, when you remove it, you remove it. And that's a good security practice, and it's just better for the long-term usability of the operating system because it's completely isolates and separates the application layer and the operating system layer and doesn't muddy the file system and the registry together. So I think it would be a good user experience, or would help with that.
It's definitely a big benefit for MSIX, but Windows 11 isn't taking it further. Was
right.
Where my disappointment around this came with.
Right.
Kieran?
Yeah. Well, this is not specifically tied to Windows 11, but since we are talking about security now, we know that there is one additional layer of security that you get with MSIX, and that is digital signing. You will have to sign your MSIX packages to make sure they get installed. So that way you will be assured that the package is not tampered and is coming from the right person. So the integrity and the identity of the package would be retained with signing. So that is one level of security that I really liked about MSIX, which was not the case with the legacy packages.
Right.
It was optional.
The signing gives you that security for getting it installed, but then the other part of it is the fact that the assets, when they're down there, are protected. They can't get written to by anything. So you don't have, your worries about malware getting in there and changing the program or program assets are now gone completely because it's protected by the OS, and it'll detect if something gets under the covers and changes things behind the scenes.
Mm-hmm.
Good points. Yeah, more to add in the general list of things that are good about MSIX. So that's an important pile too. So app attach, I think, is one of these features that I've heard a lot of people pretty excited about it, pretty much saying this is why MSIX is relevant. Like, this is the killer MSIX feature. And I'm not personally an Azure virtual desktop user, but I certainly understand and appreciate the benefit of it. I wonder how widespread it's being used. In putting this together, Tim corrected me. It's not Windows Virtual Desktop anymore. It's Azure Virtual Desktop, and that's not Cloud PC. It's the whole desktop in the cloud from Microsoft thing's getting a little confused right now, I think.
Yeah. Well, App Attach is really for any scenario where the virtual machine is getting booted and a user is getting logged in, and you want to rapidly get those applications put down. I mean, it's what really drove AppV was the fact that you could do that, and very quickly, in a few seconds per application, the user would see all of their applications in there. So non-persistent VDI machines, which AVD would be, or also the server-based computing stuff, things people have been doing forever with Citrix and with VMware Horizon, where you're having multiple users sharing that operating system. And so they come in, they log in, their applications show up, and you don't have to wait 2-3 minutes per app to get those things installed. The installation is pretty instantaneous, which is why those folks are really excited about it. They want to stay with that type of model and just have a basic OS, and user logs in, and boom, their applications show up.
Right. And unlike streaming or an advertised shortcut, it's really there.
Right.
Karen?
One advantage that I see with App Attach is the kind of control the IT team gets on this. They have the complete control of managing, and also the best thing is about the updates. So it is just like it is a VHD file. It is an image file. You mount it on a machine. You could detach it anytime, and you could update it with a new version. So I think it's a great control that the IT team would have when they are dealing with App Attach. But we'll have to wait and see how it goes.
Yeah.
I think it fits really well in the virtual desktop or the new Azure Virtual Desktop scenario. I find it a little hard to imagine in the current scenario where I have only VMs, let's say a hypervisor kind of a scenario. I find it a little difficult to imagine how can it have big benefits.
Yeah, I mean, it comes down to updates too, right? So if you attach an application and now there's a new version, you can just attach the new version in the same way. So the deployment's impressive, but the ability to update, I think, is going to be something that a lot of people put a lot of stock in. Now, it's not you just throw an MSIX file over there. There's obviously steps. So you have to stage it first and prepare it. Then you register it with the virtual machine. And to get it off, you reverse that same process. You have to deregister it and then destage it is the term. So it requires a little bit, and we're trying to put some features into Admin Studio to help make that easier. You can create an app attach from any package you have in there, or MSIX package you have in there. So there's things that I think can be done to make it easier, but it's mostly a script thing, and I think everyone's pretty comfortable with command lines and PowerShell as a command line tool, even if it's not scripting. But this is potentially a very good thing for MSIX as a technology for adoption, because if you are heavily invested in Azure Virtual Desktop, then this is pretty attractive, and it is another very good reason for you to consider MSIX.
I think that is one good thing about this thing. That Microsoft has made sure there is a command line, a PowerShell commandlet for each of these. So you could technically write a script, and all of this could be automated. Mm-hmm. So that could save you a bunch of time.
If you're running AVD, it's actually integrated into the portal as well. So you'd have your packages up on Azure Files, and you would just assign the application to the user through there, and you don't have to worry about any of this scripting. The scripting is great. I mean, I do the scripting, right? Because I'm a hands-on kind of guy, but for a major enterprise deployment that you're trying to do through AVD, you really want to have that automation in place.
Yeah, they're recognizing that it needs to be easier and doing what they can to make it easier. So that's certainly going to help adoption. Package support framework. This is definitely a Tim topic here. I mentioned it early on. That there was applications running in a virtual container. That can be a problem for a lot of applications at runtime. So this is a runtime technology, not something changing the installation, but actually changing the execution and behavior of the application while it's running, which is pretty different from other things that we would have done in the past to tweak an application to make it work. And it comes with its own complexities, which again, as a vendor of tools, we're trying to make easier. But it's a framework. The redirection fix-up is the one 99% of people that have ever touched one would be familiar with. But I did see the others out there, and I thought, what a perfect opportunity to have somebody that knows what he's talking about, give us the high level on these, just so we don't feel stupid when we see a list of things we don't understand.
Yeah. I mean, Bob, as you said, trying to run some older software inside a container sometimes brings up challenges. And sometimes it's not only that, it's also just running it on a modern operating system. I mean, Windows is pretty good in their APIs and keeping things backward compatible, but occasionally there are some issues that are in there. And in Microsoft AppV, Microsoft had decided to build a lot of those types of remediations into the AppV container to do that automatically. And with MSIX, they decided to do it differently because this was going to be both a developer and an IT pro technology. They decided to separate those pieces out because the developers shouldn't need this because they can change their code. And so they kept it as a separate piece. So it is an add-on that basically intercepts the calls from the application and says, oh, I see what you're doing. Let me do this other thing for you instead, which is what you really want when you're running in the container. So the file redirection fix-up solves that problem that's created by what I talked about earlier, that no file can get overwritten. Well, you might have a configuration file there that needs to get overwritten, and so we have to handle that. And that's one of the big uses of the file redirection fix-up. The dynamic library fix-up comes into play when we end up with these DLL not found issues because the container is set up a little bit differently, and there's 2 or 3 different reasons why a standard application would suddenly not find its DLLs. And this just fixes the problem. It's just a checkbox item for you. You say, I want this thing, and once you do, if the application asks for a DLL and it's anywhere inside your package, it's going to find the DLL and take it from the package. So that one's really cool. The Reg Legacy fix-up takes care of some problems with particularly older applications with how they try to deal with the registry. And my best example of this is an application that goes to work with a registry key under HKey current user software and the vendor name, right? And under a standard operating system, even a user that has no elevated privileges can do anything they want under HKey current user. So that application can open up the key and say, I want read, write, and delete access to that key. In MSIX, you can't get that delete access. And so the application fails. So we just sort of fake it out because most of the time we see these applications are just opening up. They're saying, give me full access. And what they only really need is that read and write access. So we just change it for them, and that takes care of those types of problems. There's also one that's not on the list here that we added late last year, I think, the environment variable fix-up. So if the application sets environment variables, we can now have those come along because MSIX just doesn't support that at all. So we added it into the PSF.
Awesome. And then the PowerShell capability was a new one. I was surprised to see it kind of provided through PSF because it's very different. But the idea is that when an executable is launched, before or after, you can have a script run, presumably to make any changes that need to be made to fix the application. But obviously that wouldn't be limited.
Well, I have to confess, I sort of twisted their arm on that one. I created a feature that gave us a backdoor to do this. And they finally, after telling us, no, we'll never do this, they finally relented and put in the scripting feature. But yeah, this is really important for
with the
kind
whole
of
custom action thing.
Yeah, but it is sort of the custom action that you need because there are some things, it's not necessarily so much I'm installing on this particular machine, so I have to install differently. It's really those things that the IT pro wants to do that, oh, it's this user, or we work with this backend database in this scenario, right? Because this is a production machine, so I need to set some things so that it talks to that database. And when I'm in a test machine, it talks to a different database. Those types of things, we need to have a runtime type of activity that happens. And since we can't do it at installation, we can't change the vendor code to put something in for their startup. This is the way to make that happen.
So would you consider this as a good option for the use cases, which we generally see in an IT pro scenario where they would have some pre-installed configurations or post-installed configurations where they might configure the kind of settings you're talking about? It could be connecting to a database or anything like that.
Yep.
So you think this would
and
be a good
you could try it for installations, but I think that's going to, like if you had to install a dependency, but I wouldn't really recommend it because that's going to cause a UAC prompt. And we don't want to be doing it because now we're talking about when the end user runs the program, this thing would happen. And that's just going to be a non-starter. You're going to have to take care of those types of things that we would also traditionally do as part of the install. They have to be handled separately as dependencies.
Or modification package, perhaps.
That is a possibility as well, yeah. The trouble with the modification package is that the files all have to be VFS oriented. So you just have to be careful on how you create that. It also wouldn't be able to create any new shortcuts. So if that dependency is something like a VC runtime, yeah, I could get away with that. But I'd be more likely to just put it in the package directly anyway.
Okay.
So it's basically only the files and registry keys what you could add from a modification package, right?
Right.
So in case you want to make any changes at the application level, and when I say application, these are, in our terminology, shortcuts. You'll not be able to make any changes. Let's say you want to add a new shortcut or something. No, modification package wouldn't allow it.
Interesting. All right, so I think most of these topics people have had some exposure to before, but there were a couple of new ones that Tim pointed out worth sharing. The first one being app installer files.
Yeah, I think this is one of the really cool minor little features that's in there that Microsoft did. And it opens up some options. And I don't know really how many people are going to want to take advantage of this, but I think you have to know about it because you're going to get asked about it. You're going to see vendors do some things with this that you're not going to like. And with just a little bit of education, you'll be able to work around it without a problem. So what this is all about, this is about getting the applications automatically updated, but through a mechanism that's not in the vendor code itself. This is supported by the operating system directly. And so the idea is you've got your MSIX package, and rather than deploy the MSIX package directly, you deploy it using this file. I've got an example up here. It's called the app installer file, which is an XML file. And that file says, here's where you're going to find the installer. But the cool thing with this is that Microsoft is leveraging the same technologies they use for the Windows Store and how Store apps update. It's different than that update mechanism, but it's leveraging the same techniques. And so once you've installed with this method, if you notice on the screenshot here, the second line there has a pointer to where this file lives. And so in this case, I have it up on a network share. It could be an HTTPS reference as well. In fact, that's probably what the vendor would do. And so Windows, depending on how you set the update policy for this particular package, which is the lower part of this file, Windows will automatically reach back to that file to see if it's changed. And so your options on this is it can happen every time the user launches the application. There's also another option that Windows will do it in the background, and every 8 hours, Windows will go back and check. And so when they see there's an update, they'll apply that update. If you want to set it in this file on the on-launch case, that if there is an update, we hold off the application, install the new version so they immediately get the new one. That's an option here in the file. But I think most people aren't going to use that option. And what will happen is they'll launch the application. It'll notice there's a new version. It'll launch the current version. In the background, it'll install the old one. And the next time that they go to run the application, they'll have the new version. So, from an IT pro perspective, if you're doing a lot of stuff with, Config Manager and MEM, you're probably not going to be interested in this because you're going to want to end up controlling all this stuff yourself through the processes you use today, the same processes you're using for all of the other application types. But certainly a smaller shop that doesn't have the manpower and the money to buy that type of tooling, they're deploying things in weirdly different ways. I think they're going to be really interested because now I can just drop the MSIX file and this XML file up on my machine, deploy using whatever mechanism I'm using today. It's the same PowerShell command. I'm just adding this -app installer argument to the add appx package commandlet. give it this file, and then automatically it'll just keep checking back for updates. And now I'm in control. As long as I've done it to my web server shares, I'm in control. I can decide, there is a new version. Let me test it out. It's good. Let me drop that MSIX file up there. Let me make a 2-line change to this file up on the server, and now automatically people will start getting that new version. Now, from a vendor perspective, for vendors that are selling to consumers, they're going to be really interested in this. Because now, assuming they're selling directly off their website and not from the Microsoft Store, if they go to the Microsoft Store, they get all this stuff automatically. But if they want to sell through their websites, then they can make the installer be this file and have it come back to their website to check for updates all the time. And so they get that same experience they get with all of that ugly code and Windows services they're putting in their product today. They can rip all of that stuff out and just have this very simple mechanism like this. And then all the consumers are going to get the latest versions as soon as it comes out, which is just great. And for the IT pro who's buying from them, if they give you this, this is sort of like, here's the EXE version of the installer. Now you got to go find the MSI version that they have somewhere that you can deploy. Well, you're going to get this. You're going to find out where their MSIX file is and just go grab it directly yourself and probably drop this file. Right. So it's going to be interesting to see if how big of enterprise will use this feature. I expect small shops are going to love this thing. It's going to simplify their life completely. Bigger shops, you've got this other mechanism. You might want to stay with it for consistency. But this can be a kind of cool way to do things, particularly if you're thinking about things like self-service. You've got a website that just gives a link to this thing. If they decide they want it, they install it. It'll update automatically. All you got to do is track licensing.
Yeah,
so it's pretty cool.
Yeah, I think the host it yourself scenario, puts another paradigm in the toolbox for how you want to handle updates. And I think that's really interesting.
Yeah.
But when you talk about it getting those files directly from the vendor site, it immediately makes everyone think automatic updates. What's the first thing we do when we deploy a commercial application?
Turn
off
exactly.
automatic updates. And a lot of times that's because security wouldn't even allow the user to do their automatic update, and it'd be a bad experience. But as things have changed security wise, and now technologies like this, I'm actually seeing more of an appetite for enterprises to say, you know what, not all my applications, but some applications, I just want them up to date all the time. If they break or cause problems, that could be a lower risk than I have, a version out there with 0-day critical vulnerability. Just stay on top.
And if you just took the vendor file, they provided this with the HTTP reference and all of that, and just made a copy and changed it to a URI reference the way I have here with a network share. So you just host this app installer file on one of your network shares and use that for deployment. You could have back-end automation yourself that checks for updates from the vendors and decide, I need to test this out. Let me put it in place and make the change at your pace, but still from an end user perspective, have it automatic once you've approved it.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, this is interesting.
Now, when you update this MSIX package, Tim, so this new update comes and sits on top of the existing MSIX as a separate entity, like modification packages today, or is it going to merge with the existing version of MSIX? I'm talking from a scenario where I want to revert the update, let's say.
Yeah, it's the same scenario for any MSIX package, that you stay within the same family name and declare a different version, right? So when it installs, it will install. It'll make use of the single instance download and all of those wonderful things we get with MSIX, but it'll install the new version and then remove the old one as soon as nobody's using the old one, right? So it does go like that. And by the way, we can also go backwards. So if we got a newer version and there was a problem with it, we again just have to to change this file, point it back to the old one, just restore that, and people will automatically downgrade and go back to the old version.
Oh, that makes it very easy.
Nice.
Yeah, I could see this in scenarios where organizations, like you said, large organizations with desktops, knowledge worker machines are probably managed through something like Config Manager, Endpoint Manager, but you might have like machines on a shop floor or point of sale machines that aren't always managed by those configuration systems. So having a one-off, it just checks they could put it on, a public facing website that's available for machine, as long as it has internet access, right? It's offline, it's 5 states over or 3 countries over, but as long as it has internet access, it can check for and download a new one when you update it. So
in fact, actually, that's one thing I forgot to talk about was the large shop. Even if they're really doing a lot of stuff through Mem and Config Manager, they still have those guys that maybe are offshore developers that are treated a little bit differently. And this could be a great mechanism for working with them.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Maybe they're not necessarily in-house 100% inside the organization, but they still want to be able to provide updates for them. So,
yeah.
And then shared package containers. Now, this is obviously something that everybody thinks of when they're like, well, what about dependencies? Do I have to put all my virtual applications together in the same package? And I don't think there was a very clear answer of how this was going to be handled until pretty recently, Tim.
Yeah, and so this is new. It's still, we have to say it's coming, right? It's not in the current version of the OS. It's not likely to be backported. So it's in the preview versions for both Windows 10, 21H2, as well as the Windows 11. So presumably we'll see it in both of those. Of course, Microsoft never promises these things till they're out the door. But the idea is that we would have multiple MSIX packages, and we'd be able to run them together, even though they're packaged separately, and designate that, hey, we want these things to run together in a single container. So for years we've had a similar type of feature in AppV called the connection group. And it's the same type of scenarios. We get software from multiple vendors. We need these pieces to work together. And this is what we're looking forward to having here. So you still have your MSIX files. The MSIX files still need to get installed and deployed, as regular packages. But you'd have this extra XML file. And I have a copy up here to show you just how simple it is, where you just list the family names of each of those packages that should run together in that container. And it's all optional, right? If the user has those packages, they'll be put together. If they're only assigned 2 of those packages, those are the ones that'll be in the container. It is an ordered list, so you think about this in terms of layering. It's as if you're thinking about a native installation, the one at the bottom of the list here, I install this first, and then I install this one, and then I install that one. That's the way you'd want to order these things, because the one at the top of the list is the one that wins. If there's a conflict between a file or registry setting between the packages, the one on top is the one that wins. Right? So very simple-minded. I did provide some feedback to them that they're ignoring so far, which is there's no version information in this file. And I think that's a mistake. Technically, yes, we don't need it, but I just think it's the sort of thing that as we deploy things over time, we expect to be able to have something that helps us understand what version of the file we're talking about here. So for now, I would probably just start adding that in as a comment in the file. You can just do an XML comment in here and just live with it that way.
I guess the attempts to be more generic, like the modification packages, where they're not quite so tied, right? But
yeah, they're not tied. You think about modification package. Right, modification package we talked about earlier. You can't have shortcuts and things like that, and anything that's an end user entry point to that package, you can't have. With this, you can. So, I hear a number of people out there that are doing some things with some packages, and they can't quite get it to work because it has a dependency to work with Microsoft Word, and the package drops down a file and then runs Word, and Word can't find the file because Word's not in the container. Eventually, when we get MSIX capable versions of those things, we're going to need a feature like this to make all that stuff work.
Mhm.
When we talk about Msx Bundle, this makes me think of Msx Bundle now. How this is different from Msx Bundle is that is primarily meant for the same MSIX targeted for different platform, right? I can't, let's say, group any outside MSIX into a bundle and call it a bundle.
Correct. Yeah, you can't. You could list some dependencies, but that's still not going to get you what you want, right? That's just going to put another thing down on the system. Whereas, this really does make the things work together. I actually sort of played with the idea of, what if I just said, I want all of my MSIX packages deployed to me all to live in a bundle.
Right. That is the scenario I was thinking.
And so it would be sort of like a per user container. And it would probably meet my needs. Not sure I'm really going to go there, but.
Nice to have options. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So the other big question that we get all the time is, when already, right? Because MSIX was announced quite a while ago now. We've been, investing in tools and information and kind of waiting for it. And it has been maturing. Obviously, when it first started, it had more problems, and it gets a little better and a little better. But it's, Tim is leading the way in terms of holding the technology accountable. And he's running tests. He's got applications that intentionally do bad things so that he can see how they're handled, and some standard applications that everybody would care about, but really examining what do you have to do. Does it have to have a PFX or a fix-up, or even with a fix-up, is it not possible? And then you've been continuing to run those tests and report on a regular basis. So you're the perfect person to give us a quick update. What's the latest? When's your next report? And then, everything is getting better, but when is the end?
Yeah. So the last report that I ran was January of last year. So the new version would probably be about the same time next year. I actually have a script running on some VMs behind the scene during this webinar. I'm repackaging a set of 70 applications in MSIX right now as we speak. It's sort of a
awesome.
Pre-run of what I'll do. I'll do the real testing in December, but I need to keep the tools and the applications and all that stuff up to date. So I'm actually going through a little bit of that now during some downtime this summer. But where we stood last January was that what I found was about 30% of typical enterprise applications were perfectly ready for MSIX without the package support framework. And above that, another 30%, if we worked at it and got the PSF in place, those would be perfectly acceptable. And that's to a pretty strict criteria. So we're about at that 60% number. If you were pretty flexible in your application, if you were willing to live with some things that might be a little different than what your MSI install is today, but it's not something you really care about, then you could probably stretch that number up into the 70% range. That's sort of where we were last January. Looking at all of the things going on this year, I don't think we're necessarily going to see that number grow. So it's grown by about 20% each year. So we started out at 20, and we hit 40, and then we hit 60. I'm not investing in the PSF this year, at least not at this point. I may by the end of the year because I'm doing a whole bunch of other things. But this year has really been more about trying to make the process of creating the packages that do work easier. And that's really been my focus this year. We'll get back to start adding some more things in. I'm waiting for the shared container thing. I think that's really important for us to get in as an option to make some of these larger applications that are a little more platform-oriented work with MSIX. And we'll see where we end up. So when will we get there? Yeah. Exactly. When will we get there? There are applications I expect will never really work well in MSIX, right? You're going to have some you're going to have to deal with that way. But But what I'm really looking forward to is
Are
what
those
Microsoft
old applications? Like, what are those applications that you think are just never going to make it? Is because people will say, well, does it have a driver? Well, you shouldn't be packaging a driver anyway. You should handle that separately. Yeah. Is it a legacy application that nobody really cares about because it's old tech?
I think it's the stuff that we think about in terms of the really old stuff tend to be pretty simple, small programs. And I actually think those will be okay. Those are the ones that will easily get to work. It's really those much more complicated ones that the developers used, all the bleeding edge things that Microsoft makes available for developers in the past. Those are the ones that are going to continue to be the challenge for us, right? So we'll see what happens there. I'm really excited what Microsoft is doing with the developers, though. I really feel we wanted developers to take on AppV in day one when we first built that thing 20 years ago, and we could never get them on board. But what Microsoft has been doing in the last year and a half for the developers with what they refer to as Project Reunion, and now it has some other names, but that's really the carrot that is going to bring them to MSIX, because it's really going to be the way that the way you build applications in the future turns out will be MSIX. And it's almost like a happenstance. It's just the way they planned it. But from a developer standpoint, they're just looking at it as, okay, if I want this new cool stuff, I've got to use this new thing they're calling now the .NET 5 framework. And if I just go from what I'm using today to this thing, then my application will be able to, I'll be able to use the code I have today, make some other fix-ups there within the code, and then I'll have a really great package. And oh, by the way, it happens to be MSIX.
Which is what we want, right? Like these packaging problems we have shouldn't be packaging problems. The vendors should, hand us something that works.
They do their job right. Our job is going to get so easy.
I mean, we'll have to find something else to do.
Yeah, we might have to find something else to do.
All right. Well, we're pretty low on time. Typical community, come check it out. But I wanted to at least get to a couple of questions while we have a few minutes left. And just so we can go straight to the end, I'll point out our next session's coming up in October. And we're going to be talking about the PowerShell App Deploy Toolkit in that one. And we hope to have the creators of that join the roundtable to answer questions and talk us through that. So set your calendar. Don't miss that one. And who's watching questions? Who wants to throw some up? There's a lot in there.
Sure, Bob. Yeah, I can certainly do that. There's one question in regard to MSIX and Windows 10. So the question is, how secure is MSIX on a Windows 10 in the enterprise? More in relation to security.
Yeah, I mean, the MSIX security benefit is, I don't think it changes on Windows 11, except for maybe the memory thing we mentioned. So the benefits are all there. It has to be signed. It can't be tampered with. I think it's, from a security standpoint, it's definitely the most secure packaging format we've seen. Anything to elaborate there, Tim?
Yeah, it's way better than not using MSIX, right? I think that's the start and end point, right? If you're concerned with security, you want to try to get here. It may not be everything you want, but it's a whole lot better than what you have today.
Okay, thank you. That probably answers that one. Tim, perhaps a question directly for yourself in relation to MSIX, specifically context menus. Is context menus coming to MSIX?
Yes, I say a familiar name there with that question. We have context menu support in MSIX. It just doesn't necessarily work for a whole bunch of applications. And basically, if you think about what a context menu is, it's a small DLL that runs in your File Explorer process. And so it's not really part of your program, it's running there. And so what Microsoft did is originally they weren't doing the context menus. They added the context menus into the basic format, and they made the integration work. But the issue still remains is that piece of software is running outside of the container. And so when the developer created a context menu that requires access to the virtual registry of the container, it can't see it. Now, I wouldn't be terribly surprised. I'm not saying anything that I've heard from Microsoft, under NDA or anything like that, but I wouldn't be terribly surprised that Microsoft isn't really concerned about the concept of all of these shell extensions running in your Explorer process. And I wouldn't be too surprised to see that eventually, as they start to become more secure with things like Windows 11, they're really going to want to pull those things out and have them run in their own memory space independently from each vendor as they bring those things in. And once they do that, then having that run inside the container so that it has full access would make a lot of sense. I'm hoping that's kind of what they do, but we'll have to wait and see what happens.
Okay, thank you, Tim. And perhaps this is for the group, and it's a good question to perhaps even end the call. Merging a couple of questions together. One is in regards to the adoption of MSIX, just to look to understand from the group really how they see the adoption coming across in the market. But other questions are the current challenges you see that in the MSIX, with MSIX in the market, that you're concerned with, Tim, that you're working on. The two wrong questions there.
Someone else want to try to take that first? I know we got some other good people on the call, and I've dominated.
That's why you're here, Tim. We want to hear your voice. I know we did, talk about this to some degree. I think the thing that will change it. Everybody, even with Windows Installer, right? The goal was, well, I want everything to be Windows Installer, and there were things that Windows Installer couldn't do or couldn't do easily that were problematic and might have hurt that. I want to be 100% on this one technology. So I think, not being in that mindset of I need 100% of my applications to all install the same way and be managed the same way is a big factor in your appetite for MSIX. Because if you can adopt it for some applications and then, grow to appreciate it more and expand that. And as you start taking advantage of some of these new capabilities we're talking about, it becomes a more valuable format to you, and you'd have more incentive to move more and more applications over. But at the same time, not all applications can. So I think, Tim's report is highlighting a big reason that a lot of people feel, well, there's no groundbreaking new benefits that make me need to do it urgently, and therefore I'm going to wait until it's further along. And so, as it continues to do better and better, that should start to fall away. But I've been maintaining that the real catalyst is going to be when we see the next Adobe Reader or the next Google Chrome come as an MSIX, and everybody really gets their hands on it in production and starts playing with these things, not just because they're curious and want to stay ahead, but because at that point they'll kind of need to keep up. Then they'll see the benefit and want to.
Yeah, what I tend to do is to talk to customers in terms of, it is inevitable. I mean, MSIX is going to win. A year ago, I wasn't so sure about that. But, MSIX is going to win. It's going to become a reality in your environment. And I think it makes sense to do some work with some MSIX packages today and to get your feet wet on it. Because it's not just the repackaging effort that you might do with Admin Studio. It's not just the deployment through Config Manager. There's the entire support chain associated with it. How does your help desk recognize that this is a containerized app and they have to work with it differently? What type of escalation procedures do you have there so that you don't end up getting every help desk call? Those are things you want to work out when there's just a couple of apps to worry about. Not when, Office suddenly hits you in MSIX form. Not that I know that that's happening.
Well, and there are many small things that we discussed through this call about no support to custom actions. I can't bundle a driver inside MSIX, and not having access to the current working directory where generally you keep your config files or maybe the log files where the app would write to. So these I see are practical problems when I really want to move a package to MSIX. So like you said, Tim, I can't just take any package, repackage it to MSIX and start using it. I think there is that extra work that I have to put on MSIX, and that I see as a challenge at this point, because the knowledge around how do I fix those problems is quite limited at this point. Should I use PSF or should I use something else, and all of that. So I think that is a major challenge from what I see.
Yeah, and I think that's why customers look for tooling from vendors like folks by you to help with that process and make it easier, because it needs to be easier than it is today. There's no doubt about that. As I talk to people about packaging challenges of MSI, packaging for MSI, packaging for AppV, and packaging for MSIX. MSIX is the hardest right now, and it shouldn't be. We need to make that easier.
An excellent point to end on. And I know there were other questions we didn't get to, so we will take a look at maybe a blog post where we address the questions we couldn't get to. But appreciate the questions. And if you have more questions later, the discussion forum is there. We welcome those questions anytime. It doesn't have to be Admin Studio related to be asked in the Admin Studio forum. Anything packaging is fine. And we're always watching and ready to engage with you there. So thanks again, and we'll see you in a couple months.
Thank you.
Thank you.